Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructiveCriticism.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 320th episode of Constructed Criticism. I'm your host, Mason, and I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Allie. Allie, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Just another day in quarantine. Just got done doing my Animal Crossing dailies. Gotta do my laps, so it's a good time. Are you enjoying Animal Crossing? I saw you tweet about this a little bit, and I figured if I get you on the podcast, you have to talk about it.
Yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing because I've never played any of the other games, but I think that's kind of the point of the game, right? Is just kind of do whatever. So
yeah, I had never played one before this one either, but I found that it's been a nice I do these little things. I set aside an hour a day, and it's nice and rewarding, and it's very cheerful and happy. And I had this blue pig named Hugo who just moved to my town, and he's so happy to be there. He always tells me how happy he is, and it makes me happy.
That's so wholesome.
Yeah, it's so great. Well, this week we're going to talk about Modern, and we're going to go over kind of the Modern metagame. But before that, I kind of want to take a moment to talk about the CFB weekly qualifier thing, because you played in it this past weekend, and I kind of wanted to check in since last week we talked about Standard. What did you decide to play? How was the whole event and stuff like that, just for people who are maybe thinking about trying to qualify for the big weekend championship. So, Allie, what was it like?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess just a little background information for people who haven't kept up with the CFB qualifiers. There's qualifiers 4 times a day each weekday, and if you 5-1 or 6-0, you qualify for the weekend championship. And because of rivals, I was directly invited to the weekly championship, and I decided to play Fires because I got a reminder from Mason the day before I registered to play Fires, and I played Fires, and it was fine. I started off 4-0, and then I hit 3 of the breeding pool decks in a row, which we were talking about last week was if you want to beat Fires, you play Saltire Bant, and that's what I ran into. Had some really just absurd matches against Bant. I was playing against just multiple Elspeth Conquers Deaths, pick up Elspeth Conquers Death with Teferi, play it again, which just hits my whole deck.
Yeah.
So that was a little rough. The tournament itself is run on Discord mostly, which I don't think there was a huge problem with that. I think the chat got kind of cluttered and off task, and I mean these are people with their name isn't necessarily tied into their Discord ID, so things got a little tense at some points. People got salty. It was a little awkward at some points, but otherwise I think the tournament was run pretty well. There wasn't huge turnover times or waiting around.
Yeah,
so,
it seemed pretty good from the outside.
Props to CFB for that. It was a good tournament.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you're playing this one again this weekend, right? They're doing 2 weeks on, then they're going to take a week off and reevaluate. Is that right?
I believe so. I know there is another one this weekend.
Okay, awesome. And you are going to compete in that one, right? Maybe?
Yes, I believe so. There's still some... There's an issue where a Mythic Point challenge was also scheduled that weekend, so... do not know what is happening with that yet.
Gotcha, okay. Yeah, I guess that thing was probably planned way ahead of time before everything happened. That makes sense. Well, that's good to hear that those things were good. I definitely had a GP vibe to it. I mean, it was harder than most GPs. It was kind of a weird PT in a weird way, right? It was much easier to qualify than a PT, right? You have the 5-1 this online event compared to a PTQ or something like that. But the names of players, I saw matches where it was Emma versus Simon Nielsen in like round 2 or whatever, you know, and it's just like, oh my goodness, like these are just like insane matches. And I went around and like the main CFV page, and like I was watching my friend Ash, who was the Rakdos person we talked about last week, who actually top 8'd the event, and she had to play like Yellow Hat and like someone from the Czech house whose name I can't remember at the moment, but just like, you know, insane opponents, and then like also names I'd like seen on Maria Deckless retweet. It was just kind of like a stacked tournament. It was kind of sick.
Oh yeah, I had some very strong opponents later in the day.
Yeah. So, you know, sometimes you like watch it like if you're watching GP coverage, right? Like sometimes on day 1, especially in the earlier rounds, if you're watching, like the pros are on buys, and like, you know, sometimes there's like some little silly stuff that you might see happen, like small mistakes that everyone does, but you just kind of don't expect to see at like a higher event. And I just like didn't see that kind of stuff. Like maybe it happened, I just missed it. I was kind of busy. But like for the most part, it was like just kind of insane games all weekend, and that's super awesome. If you're looking for a competitive fix and you want to like play standard, this seems like the way to do it. Going into this next weekend, though, in case someone's listening, kind of rechecking, do you feel the same way about standard, or have things kind of changed for you any?
I think because the breeding pool decks have split off into like specifically Sultai and Bant, I think there's too many breeding pools for Fires to be as successful as I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
So I would probably not register Fires at this point. I think I would look into Bant. I still don't. I know the Sultai deck won, but I'm still not a huge fan of it. So I would probably look into Bant or the Rakdos Sacrifice deck again.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Fires is fine, but you're going to have a hard time really converting, you know? Like we talked about the quality of players and the breeding pools on the rise. Like it feels like maybe that might be a good way to qualify, and then when you play the main event to change things up. That would be kind of my assessment of it. Well, that's going to do it for that. Thank you for sharing about that, Allie. I know that like sometimes it's hard to like get your thoughts about like a tournament like that, you know, and share them. So thank you for sharing that with us. That's going to move on to the always improving moment of the show. Allie, you're up first this week. How did you improve this week?
Am I allowed to like just share like a play?
Yeah. Yeah, you can do whatever you want on this segment. This is like, it can be the craziest thing sometimes.
All right. Well, it was actually a moment this weekend that just kind of made me miss tournament magic, which makes me really happy to be back in these kind of like high stake environments, because having like really like intense or obscure lines or plays, like maybe in like a league, you're like, oh yeah, that was cool, but like when it's in a tournament and it works out for you, it's just this extra level of like hype and excitement when you execute it correctly. So I got to experience that again, which was very nice. Like I said, I was playing Fires this weekend, and I was playing against Sultai. It was one of the Sultai matches I actually won for some reason, but I could tell how my opponent was playing that they were going to Casualties of War me next turn. I had Cavalier Flame out, I had Kenrith out, I had a Fires in play and a Teferi on 5, and a second Kenrith in hand. So I'm sitting here anticipating a Casualties of War, and I'm just thinking like, that just kind of like blows me out. I can't really find a way past that. And then it kind of hit me. I'm like, so I guess if I can find a land in minus Teferi and just normal draw for turn, I can bounce my own Fires with my Teferi and then play land, Fires, Kenrith, activate Kenrith, and swing for lethal the following turn, assuming that the casualties hit my first Kenrith, and that's exactly what happened. Ooh. And it just like worked out perfectly. It was like exact lethal. I was streaming, I freaked out. I need to go back in my stream and actually find that, because I need to clip that and just plaster it on the website.
Yeah, that's a sick, like, what's the play too? It's like, if you like set that scenario, like, all right, I'm on like going into their turn 6, they haven't done very much, whatever. Like I am like 100% sure they have casualties. What do? You know, it's like I don't know if I very quickly, if ever, get to bounce my own fires. That's like a very sick play. That's awesome, and that's the game you won, right? Like you crushed them.
Yeah.
Nice. You loved to also hear when you make the sick play and it gets rewarded too. Not only like did they have casualties, but it all pays off. You know.
I was talking to my opponent in Discord after, and they just like said it was like a really sick play too. I'm like, oh, thank you. If you saw my stream, you would have seen me freak out.
There's still time. I have a 6-minute delay if you want to go check it out. Oh my goodness, yeah, that's all. I must have missed that one. I was watching like I kind of mentioned earlier, but I had like 4 streams up, so I had like you, Emma, Allie, Jess, and Ash up, and I was like swapping between y'all, and Ash didn't have a delay, so like I would start on her games, and sometimes I'd be like, oh no, like all the other games are going, I'd like jump around in different time zones. It was pretty fun. I also loved when I got to the point where I was watching you watching Emma, and I was watching Emma watch your stream on the delay of watching her. That was so good.
Yeah, I might. I mean, like it's obviously a high stakes tournament, so I still need to think about if I want to do a delay this weekend. It kind of like distances you from chat is not
yeah, it's I know Autumn, I had Autumn's pulling up every now and again too, but they had a hand cam, like a hand hider.
Yeah, I don't think I'm interested in that, but I'll figure something out for this weekend. I just need to think about it a bit.
Word, yeah. It was at least the novelty of that interaction was very good, and I know I'll always remember that'll be like a great story to tell once we're all back in event halls. It's like, oh my gosh, just the one time I was watching a tournament end. Well, that's back on topic though. That's a great always remember. That's like a really sick line to like figure out, and actually capitalize on. That's awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So my always improving moment is also kind of like I have to give us a little preamble to it. So I played the Lotus Box Patreon Championship Cup thingy. And it was Pioneer, and so I tried to figure out what deck I wanted to play in Pioneer, and pretty quickly I landed on Inverter or Mono White, and I love Inverter. I think it's great, but I expected a lot of like the Lotus Box people and the patrons to be playing Inverter, especially after checking out like what they would play, and it was like basically it was like Spirits and Inverter was like the only 2 decks they suggested. I'm like, well, that's a bad matchup, and that's the Mirror, and I kind of didn't want to super tech for the Mirror, right? And because that's like how Inverter got to the 49% win rate, is like we teched out for each other too much and lost to the other stuff. And even if I think like a large number of people are going to be on Inverter, which it turned out 21 of the 73 people were on Inverter in that tournament, I would still like, it's just a huge amount of the field that would not be susceptible to main deck Narsets and disputes and stuff like that. And so I was like, all right, I think I'll play Mono White then. And then this is kind of where the always improving moment happened, is that I decided that if that's the logic, I should play Kane's Mono White deck that's playing Karn, the Great Creator, over the extra Gideon's interventions and the extra Gideon allies in the card to like make your Gideon of the Trial stronger against Inverter, because that gives you like a really big edge in the mirror, because not only do you have like the tutorable hate cards for the mirror match, but you also just make it so the Ballista combo can't ever happen to you. So it's kind of like this huge edge, right? And it gives you like a little bit of a weird angle of attack and stuff like that. And the always improving moment, the breakdown is that I think that logic tracks until you like go back and double check your work, and you're like, wait a minute, if I'm playing Mono White because of Inverter and I'm doing this, then I'm kind of like half stepping in 2 directions. And if I don't think people are going to play Mono White a whole bunch, like I thought it would be like the 3rd or 4th most popular deck because people just don't like Mono White that much, and turned out to be the 2nd most popular, but only 9 people. And that's kind of like me. They clump me in there. Then I should be playing the other version, because now I've kind of like half stepped in 2 directions. And so the plan of like, okay, I'm going to zag on these people and then I'm going to have the hate card here just doesn't work out, because now you have this Karn, which is fine against Inverter. You can go get like a Pithing Needle and a Tormund script, but besides that, you don't really have a lot of options. So the always improving moment was like, oh, I like after the tournament, I realized I should have gone back and double checked, like just like in a matchup, right? Like when you change a card in your deck, or maybe you change the context of your deck a bit, a matchup that was really good before could now be really bad. And I basically did that, but didn't think to double check in the moment. And it was a great, like, we have to do this kind of stuff. Like we need to make sure we're like the logic still tracks if we go too far off the main path. So that was my always improving moment of the week. It's kind of, okay, if we have this sort of logic, does this work? Let's make sure we double check our work, and slowing down and doing that. So that's where I'm at with it. And I think Dylan played like actual Mono White in like top 16 of the tournament or something like that. So, clearly the right idea, but a little zag on there. Went too far off the path.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's definitely something that I don't think is thought about enough. So I think that's great to bring up. I also have not followed Pioneer in a very long time. But
Yeah.
tournament sounded really cool. I'm glad there's multiple opportunities to stay competitive in these times.
Yeah, for sure. Also, that tournament was so hard. Like, my first round was against a Moto Grinder whose name I can't remember, but when I saw it, I'm like, oh my gosh. My second round was against a GP top 8 competitor. My third round was Dylan Donegan. Like, then I played against Diamato, and then I was just like, I'm just like playing a day 2 of an open right now, and this is a 1K. Like, what is happening? And like the other people in the tournament, it was insane. It was kind of like a little mini open. It was so wild. It was a great time. So if you're looking for a competitive like Eternal formats, that might be something to check out. I think they're going to do one again in a couple weeks, or maybe even next weekend. I'm not 100% sure on the details there, but that's going to do it for that. If you want to help support the show, you can always go to patreon.com/ccmtg to support the show. You can also check out our sponsor at Oasis Games. It's another way to help us out. You can use the code ccmtg at checkout to get 4% off your order. And if your first order, you can use the code Would That Be Good to get 15% off your order. So that's a great way to get a big chunk of it, and it lets them know that we sent you there, and that can help us out. And, you know, what we talked about last week, maybe you're saving up to buy a whole deck, or, you know, get excited for when all this ends, or just pick up commander cards for, you know, when that time comes. You should definitely check them out. They basically have everything you could ever want all the time in all the languages. Like a lot of my like cool Japanese cards I've gotten from Oasis Games. So make sure to check that out. And then one of the benefits of being a patron, which we talked about a second ago, is you get to ask the Patreon question of the week. And let's hop right into it. Adrian asked, and I'm going to kind of change it a little bit because it relates to limited, but I think it's great for Magic in general. So Adrian kind of asks, hey, I've been playing a lot of Magic lately, and I can't tell if I'm improving or remaining where I am. I've noticed small plays here and there that I could have done better, but besides that, I can't really gauge it. My results have improved a tad, but I don't know if I'm getting lucky or I'm actually improving. My question is, how can you know those kind of things? How do you determine luck versus actual improvement? And Allie, what are your kind of first thoughts on that?
I actually think this is a great question. I think the shortest answer is I think it's really hard to tell in a short time span, whether that be like a handful of games, like a handful of leagues, or like a couple days or whatever. I think it really takes a while to see if you are improving or not. And like the trick with that too is like Magic is a pretty high variance game. So even like if you are improving, there's still going to be like rises and dips and like actual results. So I guess in the way, like a way that I like to really approach it is kind of after each one of my games, like regardless of results, just kind of like take a look at how I've been playing, like kind of review my match, think of some like alternative lines, where the match maybe went wrong, stuff like that, and just like get a feel if I feel like I am playing well or if I'm like making mistakes or something. Another thing I like to utilize is other people like watching my matches and asking me like why I made specific plays, or like did I consider this, or like even if it's not like directly suggesting like a better line to me or something, just having that discussion for me is really helpful. It makes me think, just kind of like go back through the match and like think about how I played, what my decisions were, what I could do differently, and stuff like that. So even if I can't necessarily identify if I was improving in that like specific game or match or something, I think that whole process in general will lead to improvement.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there with everything you said. Like, it is something. The one thing I would say is that when you first start playing Magic, or any game really, and you start to really work on it and try and improve, you get these big dopamine hits, right? When like you start to actually execute on something, right? So like an example might be if you've played Smash Brothers ever, like learning how to edge guard correctly, right? And like do that thing in the game. It's like, oh, I can see myself doing this thing. And then eventually like the things become harder and they take more practice and they take longer to get good at. And then Magic, just like you said, there is like, you know, a good amount of variance. And so sometimes it might seem like you might feel like you're doing everything wrong because the results aren't coming, but really it's more like, oh, you're doing things right, they just didn't break for you right this time. It's a feature, not a bug in some ways in Magic, depending on who you ask. But yeah, it's going to like take a while for you to notice that. And really it's something where I love what Ali said about like, or what you, I guess I should say what you said about reviewing your match and that kind of thing. And I love to do that in the moment. I love to do it at the end of the day, and I love to do it at the end of the tournament too, especially if it's like an open or something like that. Like this past weekend, I played a match versus Diamato, like I talked about, and he was on Sultai, and I felt like I played it really, really poorly. Like multiple spots, I feel like I just made the wrong decision. I think I only really made one play that was really good, and that was something. It ended up winning me the match, but I was like, dang, this is like really bad. And so I was actually waiting for his Twitch VOD, and tonight I'm going to go watch it from his side and try and review it, because I think I just got a little, like, not even a little lucky. I got very lucky in multiple spots, and you do have to be able to put yourself in a position to capitalize on luck. It's part of Magic. But I think being honest with yourself, even when you win especially, it's easy to go back and look at your losses and be like, oh, I did this, this, and this wrong, you know, and all these things. But it's harder when you win to go back and be that critical and be like, oh my gosh, I played so poorly that round. I need to work on all of these things. And that's something that I think is super important. And just like you said, Elliot, it's hard to know. And sometimes it's going to take a long period of time before you can kind of definitively say like, okay, I'm like actually improving at Magic. You know, it's like, you're not going to know in one draft. You're not going to know in maybe even one tournament. You know, it's going to take a lot more than that.
This is also why I'm like a huge proponent of consuming content that's more like theory based, like theoretical content and Magic gameplay and stuff like that. Like, sure, we can read amazing content on specific decks or sideboard guides, et cetera, but I think getting to the point where you can kind of get some Magic fundamentals down, and that's just in your mind. The first thing that comes to mind for me is thinking about the power of like double spelling in a turn, like casting 2 spells in one turn versus like playing 1 bigger spell in a turn. So just kind of like consuming content around like those kind of theories or ideas, like understanding different situations, like when something's appropriate and when something's not. Generally just like kind of having those fundamentals in your mind while you're playing has helped me in the past too.
Yeah, I think those are big moments too. And when you realize when those kind of things become, not to say second nature, but the act of checking in on, is this the moment to do this versus that, or am I just doing this instinctively? I think those are kind of signs. If you're looking for something that maybe is a little bit more noticeable and actionable, like in trying to evaluate yourself, that might be a moment where you're like, oh my gosh, like I just kind of did these things that I like had heard PV talk about, right? Or I heard Ali talk about, and I just did them, you know, and I acted on them. And so I think those are big moments as well. So, Adrian, I hope that was helpful. Definitely, you know, if you want to talk about that more in the Discord, hit us up there. And if you're a patron of the show, you can ask a question each and every week and get answered. On the Discord, there's a Patreon question little tab, and you just can throw a question in there and we go and pull them out. And then we do little weekly reminders, you know, in case someone has something that maybe they just forgot to post or whatever. And yeah, it's awesome to have that kind of option available to everyone. And we hope y'all get a lot out of these Patreon questions. Ali, are you excited though to talk about the most popular format in Magic the Gathering that isn't limited or commander?
You know what? Yeah.
You're excited?
I'm fine with where Modern's at right now.
I actually loved what you said before the podcast about how it's kind of a new format and we're all kind of in that still really awesome, like, all right, but what's really good phase, you know? And that's kind of when Modern's at its best in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, like some people have talked about like Channel Fireball not posting as much data, I think, as before, going into like GPs, and obviously we don't have like GPs or SEGs moving forward for at least a couple months. So there is kind of that thought, like maybe these formats are not going to get, quote, solved as quickly as they have in the past. So like we're not seeing like a clear best deck yet. And I mean, if we look at this recent Moto PTQ, there's just some
bangers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the deck that won the Moto PTQ this past weekend was essentially Ponza. It's like the new form Ponza where they only play like 3 pillages, and then they have like the Magus of the Moons, basically, where Blood Moons, depending on the variation. Like this one just had Magus, and it's kind of like green and red spells at that point. And it was a deck that was kind of popular with Once Upon a Time being out, and I actually heard a great quote that like it's a great example of like Magic fundamentals, where it's just kind of like if you have efficient threats and like attack people and put a clock on them, you will beat a lot of other things that are just kind of like flounder, right? And other decks have a fail rate, but like 1 mana 2/2 into 2 mana 3/3 into 3 mana 4/4 just kind of like beat people down. And this deck lost Once Upon a Time. I was like, dang, that kind of sucks that the deck's gone from the format. And apparently I was just super wrong. It's just, winning the PTQ. It's crazy. But yeah, also in the PTQ, we see like Prowess, Tron coming back, which is a deck that I was not expecting to see. We see the sweet new Bant Snow deck. There's just a bunch of awesome decks, and we kind of wanted to take today's episode and just kind of talk about Modern. A lot of time on CC, we do episodes that are kind of more those theory-based things like Allie was talking about earlier in the Patreon question. And right now it kind of seems like a moment where everyone is really only able to play Magic, and it felt like, well, Modern's really cool right now. We should talk about this. So that way people can, hop on Magic Online. It's like a cool thing to do during this quarantine. So we're just going to talk all about Modern this week, kind of like we did Standard last week. Allie, I want to get started with a deck that I think you're quite a big fan of, and that's Jund. What do you think about Jund right now? It's kind of the last tournament we had for Modern. It was like one of the breakout decks. It's gotten Kroxa. What do you think about it?
I mean, obviously I'm super biased. Jund is one of my favorite decks in Modern history, other than Splinter Twin. But
you're a Splinter Twin lover.
I forgot. I do think in general, as much as I do love Jund, I try and stay as unbiased as possible when it comes to Jund-related things. I mean, like, you rarely see me actually register Jund for a tournament. It's kind of just like, oh yeah, like, I'll stream it, I'll play a league, it's really fun, I play it in my free time because it's just a really fun deck. But I think it's really decent right now. There's not a whole lot of unfair things going on that could kind of push Jund out. I mean, there's like Blood Moons, and that's what I've been losing to, is specifically Blood Moons. But other than that, like, I think Jund has a good E-Tron matchup, good Prowess, close with Burn. Yeah, and like, so just like a lot of what people are playing, and you can kind of tailor your sideboard to whatever everyone is playing, which I'm a proponent of. I mean, the thing that always just makes Jund really sad is 1, Tron, and 2, Jund just like has this thing where it loses to off meta decks, and it infuriates me to no end. So that's like one of the biggest reasons why I don't bring Jund to like competitive tournaments, because it's Modern, so people are going to play literally whatever they want. And
yeah, for real,
whatever they want is what beats Jund. So
yeah, it's so funny because so there's like some stereotypes about Jund players, right? Like, you all only own foil decks. If someone owns Jund and it's not foil, I don't believe you. Please stop lying to me. We can be honest with each other. And the second thing is, like, sometimes like they just like, no one, like, you can't. The thing about Jund, like you said, is like you can build your deck to like attack things, right? And like that's when Jund's at its best. It's like when the metagame's kind of narrow, or like you have the right read and like you're able to capitalize on it, right? And then Jund just like, every time someone plays Jund in the tournament, unless they like won the tournament, they always have this bad beat story about some unplayable garbage deck that beat them in like round 3. They're like, yeah, I played against Pedalpod or whatever, and it just like did its weird things, and I couldn't interact and I died. So yeah, I think Jund is actually like kind of good right now because Modern, at least on Magic Online, and that's like where you can play Modern, is like so fair right now. It's kind of absurd. I've been watching you stream it some, and I've been playing a bunch of Modern leagues in the last week and a half or so, and it just seems like everyone's playing basically fair decks and prowess. Which is like kind of a fair deck and a good matchup. Like if there was an unfair deck you had to play against, like you said, prowess seems like almost a buy from like being on the other side of the table. I dread it.
I love a good prowess matchup.
Wow, yeah, that's how you know it. It's like, yeah, prowess is great. I would highly suggest you play prowess if you're. No, yeah.
I mean, like looking at like prowess, a lot of the prowess decks, not always, but like most of the time, you need creatures to stick, which is hard to do with Jund. Whereas, like if you're more of the burn deck than prowess, you can just bolt face until they die.
Yeah, it's kind of like prowess has to have like the creatures to make up for like the raw massive deal threes, and in exchange sometimes they get like these blitz kills, and then it's just like, okay, every card in Jund is like actually profitable. You just have no bad cards, like ever. It's like such it's almost like a nightmare. It's kind of like contrived like this way to like, what's the worst thing that could happen to you? Is it like efficient answers and threats with a fast clock at times? And it's like, yes. And it's like, well, that's what's happening.
Yeah. Well, Jund also got a huge improvement to it with Kroxa, actually. I know people are kind of like still like, oh, is Kroxa Modern playable? And I'm just gonna like let you know now, yes, she is. She's awesome. I don't know if Crocs is actually a she or not, but I'm going to roll with it.
I love it. I'll edit that part out. Crocs is a she as far as I'm concerned.
Hell yeah.
She slaps.
Yeah, so it's just like Jund kind of had this issue of like, yeah, like we can get to a point where we both just have like nothing on board, nothing in hand. We're both just top decking. Like sometimes we have a Tarmogoyf. But if like how we've said, this format's more fair, a little more interactive, so like sometimes it comes down to like, oh, Jund top decked another land, but my opponent just top decked a Teferi or something. So having kind of just like another like big threat that you don't even need to like have in your hand at some point is pretty profitable. It's really aggressive too. It can change, like Jund was already a deck that could change into the aggro deck, but I think especially now with a big 6/6 that deals 3,
yeah,
it's really good.
It also synergizes so well with Liliana too. It's kind of like, oh, it's like I just want to discard this one. It's like pseudo draw a card if I ever bring Kroxa back, you know? It's so wild. I'm glad you brought up Kroxa because that was the card I was going to ask about. I think that card's like so good in that deck. It also makes like some of your hate cards that you already kind of wanted to play even better, like Ashiok Nightmare Renderer, the 3-mana one from War. Just like, oh, I want this so like Titan decks can't search on me, and I kind of want it as like a half hate graveyard card, and I'll just mill myself to like get to my Kroxa, and also it fuels the Kroxa so well. It's just kind of a match made in heaven. So speaking of Kroxa, let's segue to what according to Moto is the most popular deck, which I'm not surprised, and it's the other fair deck. It's the Uro Bant Snow deck. It seems like the two Titans are kind of waging this fair war in Modern. I've seen you stream this deck. Yeah, there's Erosa and there's the Uro Snow deck. Which one do you want to talk about first, Allie? Because I want to cover both of them.
Oh, right. There's
a bunch of Uro decks, it turns out.
There's a lot of Uro. Uro is taking over every format. We can talk about the Snow deck, because who played that one? All right, I got that list up.
Yeah, so what do you think about this deck? I actually streamed a league with it earlier today in preparation for today. I know you streamed some with it last week. What were your thoughts after playing the deck? I played the no Stoneforge, kind of like all the Planeswalkers controlling version, personally.
Yeah, I streamed that version as well. I think I'm counting the first league as a 4-1 because I timed out with my opponent also almost timing out, so it was just kind of like a weird matchup, but I was very far ahead, and I was streaming, so I get the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, if
that I could have actually played.
Easy. Would have got that attack with the arrow, drawn the bolt, or drawn the quad, killed him. No doubt in my mind. So did you like it?
Yeah, I mean, like, this deck is doing like all the right kind of fair things. It's interactive. I'm just not a huge fan of like Teferis in general. So
you're not vibing with Teferis.
Like I think it's a good deck. It's definitely not really my playstyle, so I guess I didn't really enjoy it. But yeah, like I've definitely registered this deck again. It felt pretty solid.
Okay, so my opinion is like a harsher stance of yours. It's kind of like, if I'm going to play a fair deck, I would like to play a fair deck that can be proactive, like Jund could. Like you kind of talked about, right? Like Jund was kind of good at already transitioning to the beatdown plan, and now Crocs has really helped with that. And while like Uro adds, I think, the capability to do that in Bant Snow, I really hate how like slow and methodical that deck, like not methodical, like slow and tedious it is, and like how its cards kind of have to line up right, where like I think one of the biggest strengths of Jund is that like discard spell Tarmogoyf Liliana, or like discard spell Kroxa Liliana now is kind of like a curve that can beat any deck, right? Like any deck could mulligan and then you just kind of rip their hand apart and they die. They just don't get to function. And this deck's kind of like, okay, I'm going to play my Astrolabe and then hold up my Kawato Mana Leak turn. Ooh, what you gonna do? And then I'll hit you for 1 because you played around my Mana Leak, and then I have to do this for like 40 more turns. And it asks so much of you in Modern. And just like you talked about, at Modern, people are going to play the decks they want. Like I played against the Elemental deck today on stream. Have you played against the 5-color Elemental deck?
Absolutely not.
I assume it's unwinnable for a fair deck. It has like Risen Reef, 12 ways to bring back Risen Reef, tutors for Risen Reef, Skelemental, which also all the things that bring back Risen Reef bring back Skelemental, and just like that's the deck. And it is like almost like I like wiped their board. I traded cards. At one point, I had like a Mind Sculptor down. I just like couldn't outvalue them because they're just like so good. And it's like, okay, this deck might be like really well positioned, but like we talked about, you're just going to kind of lose to these random decks that are in Modern. And if you're not okay with that, then it's kind of hard to register this deck. And I'm just not okay with that, especially when I'm reactive. Also, I'm just not that smart. I just can't figure out that kind of stuff forever. That's just the truth, you know? Mama didn't raise a genius. I'm just above average at best. So
yeah, I know this deck is supposedly better than the Stoneforge version, but I think I would rather just play the Stoneforge version and have something to do. I guess that's what Uro is in this deck, but like you still don't even like fill up your graveyard that quickly.
Yeah, you really don't. And then sometimes you like really want to have spells. Like I had a couple times where it's like I really want to fetch and like put this path on top of my deck to like cover this thing, but if I do that, like that's gonna throw off my Uro like mana and like my Uro like converting with everything. It's just so awkward so many times. And I agree that probably in theory having Stoneforge Mystic in your deck is a liability, but I think what is often left out is the fact of being able to punk people as an option in your deck when it's not like it's a super cute thing, right? It's like, okay, I have Battle Skull, a sword, Stoneforge Mystic, and we still have like I think like 2 Uros in the normal one. So it's like, okay, these Stoneforge Mystics aren't super great if I draw like the 3rd and the 4th one, but they're still really good. And in bad matchups, I can slam a Stoneforge, force a negation their play, and like Cryptic the next one and hope to go the distance, you know? Like that's like actually a plan against the BS in Modern. And I think that aspect of decks is often undersold by players. They're just kind of like, oh, why would I do that? My Teferi and Jace eventually beat everything. And it's like, well, I guess you're right. You can technically do that. But like the other decks, like the Erosa deck, right, are like Uro decks with a proactive game plan and like can actually end something. Have you played the Erosa deck any? Because I have not, unfortunately, had a chance to.
I have not played it. I have not seen it played. I know, I think Dylan Donegan has put up a fair amount of results with it, but I literally have just not been paying attention to this deck at all.
Yeah, so it's so funny because Donegan keeps like seemingly crushing it. He's top 8'd like 2 or 3 Modern PTQs with it. He's done very well in the challenges with it, and no one else is picking it up. It makes me think that Donegan might just be good at Magic. But I think it seems strong too. The artifact count is relatively low on like the upfront artifacts. There are like 12 in the deck, and then it has Gilded Goose Urza, so it's like 20 technically. But it still plays things like Rebuke and Galv Blast, which can be a little awkward at times. I think I like that kind of Uro planned better than Snow, but I think I have a real bias that needs to be like told to listeners that like I think sitting around and not doing anything in Modern is a losing strategy, like fundamentally, and I don't think anything in Modern has made that change except for Oko. I think Oko was the only thing that like could actually handle every threat on its own, and we saw like Harlan and Drake like crush with the Bant Snowblade deck, and we saw Oko crush everything with Urza. And, like, the common thread in those decks are, like, Answer Spells and Oko can go a long way. So, I just don't believe you can sit around and do nothing. Like, you don't just get to draw cards. I'm sorry. I want to. I don't want to, like, not do that. But you're not allowed, I think. So that really frames my opinion on it. I don't have a whole lot to say about Urozo. I think there's probably a good Urza deck out there. Like, probably actually a great Urza deck. But we just kind of have to find it. Just like we had to find Grixis Death Shadow, you know?
I do have to say, this is kind of a little off topic, but
I love some off topic.
Panza winning this makes me so angry because it just doesn't make sense that you would want like land destruction or like Magus of the Moon. That is something I'll say against the winning deck is they did switch from Blood Moons to Magus of the Moon, which I think is a great play if you're playing this deck because you do want to be aggressive. You don't want to just have a Blood Moon sitting on the battlefield because it just doesn't matter a lot of the times.
Which is a great thing, by the way, for the old Bant Snow, like Stoneforge Mystic, like has a liability. Being a 2/2 is a liability sometimes, but it also just kills people. Like killing people is good.
Yes.
Sorry, keep talking. I didn't want to interrupt, but
it's fine. It's just like it makes me so mad because everyone's playing Astrolabe, so these like Blood Moon effects are terrible.
Yeah, it is funny how much Blood Moon there is when there are so many like reasons to play basics. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like I mean sometimes you can cheese out the Jund player because they didn't have fetches in their opening hand, or you can cheese out the Etron player because they don't have a waste or a Mind Stone or something. But I think for the most part, like that's just not what you want to be doing right now.
Yeah, it's so it is bizarre, right?
I think the rest of the deck like has some play if you're playing like the winning list has like Klothys and Glorybringer and Bloodbraid Elf being like really aggressive, trying to do this quickly. Like that's something I can get on board with. I just think like Magus the Moon right now, or like Blood Moon, I'm not seeing it.
Yeah.
Like Prowess is a good deck too. Those are just mountains.
Yeah. Prowess is one of the decks I want to talk about. We'll get to that soon. But yeah, like the best decks in the format just like most of them just tell you to play a bunch of basics. It is bizarre. And I think there's something we're kind of hit on a couple times on the show, and I think this deck kind of hits on it as well. And maybe this was the reason you're bringing it up. It's just like being proactive is good. You know what I mean? It's just so powerful to be the attacker.
Mm-hmm. And like maybe the Magus of the Moon, like switching from Blood Moon to Magus of the Moon makes it just like a free card to play because it's taking up that spot and just being a 2/2 that has the potential to do something in the matchup. So like maybe I can see it, but I would not be playing the card Blood Moon specifically, at least in the main deck.
I agree. It does kind of help with one of the decks that you did allude to, and it can kind of punk them, right, in the form of Etron, which has been kind of a deck that's risen up every time fair decks start to rise up. But that's also something where I wanted to bring up. I was a huge Etron hater back in like 2018 when the deck were 29, whenever that deck first started popping up. Hated it. Thought it was actually terrible. Then it got Karn, the Great Creator, and we figured out Microsoft Lettuce Plus. That card is a win. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of good. And then over time, with those cards together, I realized, oh, this deck is just actually good. This is just like a good deck. Sure, there's the 3/2 Matter Shaper meme or whatever, but like the core of that deck is strong, and you just had to play some pieces that weren't super great along with it. And now I don't know why we're playing this again, except that there are other fair decks, but I feel like there are better ways to attack other fair decks. And I see these players who I think are quite good just constantly saying like, oh, this deck's great, felt great. And I can't get it. I don't get it. Like, you don't have the stuff that made the deck good before. Can you tell me, Allie? Because I feel like I'm in a loony bin. I just don't get it. It's like we're all in love with Thought-Knot Seer and we can't let go. And I want to let go, and they just won't.
Nah, y'all can keep playing Etron. That's fine. You can also keep telling yourselves that you can beat Jund with Etron. I have lots of video evidence to say contrary to that.
You're an Etron denier. This is what I'm hearing. I didn't realize how anti-Etron you were. This is a revelation to me. So you just hang on. I'm being dead serious. So you believe that Jund versus Etron is not a good matchup for Etron?
Yeah, that has been my experience, at least. I don't know if it's maybe I just attack the matchup different.
How do you approach it, just out of curiosity? Also, I guess my follow-up question is, do you think it's a good matchup for you, or do you feel like it's a 50-50 matchup? Like, what is, like, I would love to hear your thoughts on this, actually.
I think it's favored for me.
Okay.
I mean, Chalice of the Void, I mean, like, the goal of Chalice of the Void, for the most part, I think is just on 1, and I don't particularly care about that past exactly turn 1 when I'm just, like, thought seizing on turn 1. I feel that I think there's, like, specific cards that I care about, being, like, just looking at this top 8 list, like, All Is Dust, and then Ugin, Emrakul, if they could even get there, but a lot of the time...
about the Tron cards.
Well, yeah, I care about them assembling Tron, and that's how you would beat Jund, realistically.
Okay.
Or if I manage to do literally nothing all game until they have 4 mana and they play a Chalice on 2, then I'm sad also. But, like, for the most part, I mean, like, they're playing, like, 1 creature per turn, which, like, Liliana can just get rid of that really easily. 2 of their creatures still get, like, fatal pushed. Oh, I guess Walking Ballista too, even though I'm not really counting that one, though.
Sure, it deletes it, basically.
And then just, like, Tarmogoyf, because there's so many artifacts and different creature types specifically in their deck, like, Tarmogoyf's just a 5/6, and Reality Smasher's, like, looking at Tarmogoyf like, dude, come on.
Yeah, that's fair. Thinking about it, I think the reason I like Etron is that it can punk you. Like, when I was thinking about, like, what would I say, like, what am I going to say about this and thinking about what you're saying, it's kind of like, yeah, Etron's nice because it can punk you. And I thought, like, oh, you can Lattice them. You can, like, go get Lattice. And I'm like, oh, wait, we can't do that anymore. This deck's so bad. I don't know. I just think I like the idea of playing a proactive prison deck. Like I've talked about a lot of times in this episode. I think just attacking is, like, severely underrated by Magic players in general, and especially in Modern for some reason. And I think, like, Chalice plus Karn, like, having a Stony Silence main deck does make sense. But even if you agree that Urza is one of the best decks, right? It doesn't play that many artifacts, and it can only ever be, like, 8% of the field. And I learned this lesson back at the Invitational, wherein, like, the Karn, the Urza blue-green deck had really taken off the weekend, or 2 weekends before at Atlanta. And I was like, okay, I don't super want that metagame for the mirror. And I think this is a flaw of mine, too. You can hear the same story from the breakdown earlier in today. It's like, don't want to super metagame for the mirror that much. So I'm going to play the deck that is pretty reasonable against everything, and it can attack this deck. And so I played Etron. And what had happened is I played against Temur Moon, then I played against Blue-White, then I played against Slivers at the Invitational, and it just retaught the lesson of, oh yeah, even if these decks are, like, the best deck by so much, like, we should all be playing Urza, as we learned, right? Like, you were very smart. You played Urza. Like, you have this good plan, and sure, you could turn to Thought-Knot Seer or someone, but you don't have anything that, like, makes that happen consistently. And instead, you're just playing, like, these pile of cards. And, like, I felt like Karn was good enough to, like, hold those things together. But I think, like, in Modern, especially Modern, people, just like you said, are going to play the stuff they like, and that means that, like, at all times, no deck will be more than, like, 10% of the room at most. Like, the Ochre Urza decks were, like, I think 11% of SEG Atlanta's day one metagame. at the SCG or something, or maybe it was like, so that was day 2 or something like that. But like, holy cow, that was the best deck. It got banned literally 24 hours later. Everyone knew what were 90% of people doing. And I get it. Sometimes you can't afford to switch decks and stuff like that. But there are other people who I know have access to a lot of cards, and they like brought Prowess, or they brought like just random piles. And it's just like, what is going on? So, I don't know. I don't believe in E-Tron. I also think Tron's unplayable. I think Tron is not a playable deck in Modern right now, even with all these fair decks. I think Tron's just not good enough. I don't know how you feel about that. But I had to have that conversation with Anderson recently where I was like, hey, man, I just don't think this is it. Like, I don't think you're allowed to do this kind of thing and, like, actually be successful. So what do you feel about Tron, I guess, is where I'm leading to, now that I've ranted about E-Tron and how much I hate it.
Well, we all know how I feel about Tron.
Sure.
I mean, I think it makes sense to me why we're seeing a resurgence in Tron. We're literally playing a fair metagame now, and I don't know, like, I don't know if people just kind of forgot that Tron was an option, but definitely think it's good now, especially with all these Titan decks seemingly not in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
I am a little surprised that we're not seeing as many people play Titan decks. I know, like, Once Upon a Time was really good, but I still think the Titan decks are good without it. But I mean, that's why we're seeing the resurgence of Tron right now. I was really mad to see it in 2 of my leagues because I was playing Jund, but I mean, it makes sense to me. We're playing against a lot of fair decks in Modern right now, so
Okay.
I think it's a solid choice.
And so I think that, like, it does make sense that like in my head, everything you're saying, like, kind of checks out, right? Like, everyone's playing fair decks, you should play Tron. Obviously capitalizes on those things very easily, but just the stuff it's doing, this isn't that powerful. Like, most, like, except for Karn and Ugin, most of the things are just, like, pretty beatable. But maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe that's just me being crazy. Maybe I'm a Tron hater. I don't know. I always do play decks that are quite good against Tron, so maybe I'm just biased now that I'm thinking about this a bit more.
Yeah, Wormcoil Engine is probably one of the hardest cards for Jund to deal with.
Sure.
You have to, like, just 3-for-1 it somehow.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and then the other decks are Path. I guess they're playing like Galblast. Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I feel like even with all that going on, the other decks that are good in this format are, when we're about to talk about them, are like Amulet Titan, Dredge Humans, and Burn. And, like, I guess Dredge is a good matchup, but, like, the other ones feel kind of bad. Let's transition to Titan, because Titan was the deck that was really keeping Tron down before. You know, like, back when we had Once Upon a Time, you just could not consider Tron because Amulet Titan was such a bad matchup and it was so clearly the best deck. What do you think's happening? Why aren't people playing Amulet? It seemed like we just put Ancient Stirrings and our deck was, like, basically as good.
I think, not to be too, like, I don't think it's, like, rude, but, like, I can't think of a better word. I just think a lot of people picked up the Titan deck with Once Upon a Time, and it was just kind of like easy wins were following. You didn't have to put, like, I mean, obviously, like, the deck is still, like, pretty complicated to play at 100%, but I mean, you can pretty easily assemble, like, play Dryad, play lands, get zombies, get Valakut triggers, kill your opponent, or, like, same thing with if we're doing, like, the Azusa plan instead, like, get a big Titan, etc., etc. And now it's, like, mulliganing decisions are a lot more difficult. Ancient Stirrings doesn't necessarily, like, fix your hand so much, and that, like, not having kind of, like, a dig tool is harder for the non-amulet versions of the deck, in my opinion, because, I mean, like, Ancient Stirrings is literally just, like, find a land then, whereas a lot of these decks before could just, like, not play amulet, not have to worry about maybe the more, like, complicated aspect of that archetype, and then just kind of, like, keep whatever hand because it has Once Upon a Time in it.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, I think Amulet's still pretty good. I do think that I am of the opinion that Jund is actually kind of a hard matchup most of the time. Just like Clock plus Disruption is kind of good against Amulet. Not like that's an unwinnable matchup or anything, but it's kind of hard. And so like the Bant Snow decks and the Arosa decks and the Jund decks being popular, I do think make it hard for you to consistently battle through that, especially if you haven't had the reps on Amulet Titan. Because I think Amulet Titan is like basically the deck in Modern that the more time you put into it, the more you get out of it. And we have like Dilks, Edgar, and Daryl to show for that. And, you know, they just consistently perform. And we saw it do well last weekend in the PTQ, and it's just kind of gone from this weekend. I think it's just hard. I think that's okay. I think it's okay to just say a deck's hard, so people are kind of shying away from it. You know, I know I have been like I just don't want to have to like battle through all this hate. I want to try and do something else instead.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yep. So what do you think about the Prowess deck? Because, you know, last week I was saying I'm trying to get better at Prowess. I want to really work on that. And so I'm excited to talk about Prowess this week. I put a bunch of hours in. What do you think about Prowess before I get to talk?
I'm not really sure how I like it right now in the fair deck format, especially with lots of decks being full of like removal or dealing with creatures. I really haven't played Prowess really ever, and I've only really been a fan of the deck during Hogak Summer. I thought Prowess was great, but other than that, I just don't have a huge interest for the deck or much experience with it either.
Okay. All right.
I like Kiln Fiend though. I think I like Kiln Fiend over Steamkin right now. I did like Steamkin with Oko though. That was I had a insane match against Casey Lancaster once on camera, and he just kind of just like went through his whole deck because of Steamkins and Light Up the Stages and Bedlam Revelers. It was like wild to watch.
Yeah, it's crazy those things happen. I can only imagine if I had like 3 extra mana on those turns. Like it's pretty crazy. Yeah, the deck is surprisingly pretty good at grinding, and I kind of actually really vibe with Prowess now. Like in the last week that we talked, like before I was really happy to get my 3-2, and then since then I just like started grinding Moto Leagues and like got a 5-0 and like a bunch of 4-1s, and I really feel like Prowess is a deck that, while it does have a really bad Jund matchup, I think the Bant matchup is actually much better, and same for the Arosa deck, which I've played against a couple times now, where the reactive nature of their answers make it so you get to dictate the game more, where Jund's proactive nature, and the reason I like Jund more, lets them dictate the game more, right? Not to mention it's the Nightmare matchup we talked about.
That's fair. Tarmogoyf seems really hard.
Yeah, I can't think of a card that's not hard to beat in Jund, to be honest. The worst one's like Kroxa, because they have to spend like 4 mana to bring it back, but even that's so hard. Takes a card.
Yeah, I guess the difference there is like against the Bant deck, like you care about them eventually escaping Uro, but that's really far from happening, whereas like Jund can kind of escape Kroxa quickly. Jund can play a Tarmogoyf and just remove all your spells. So I see it.
Yeah. Also, like the difference in Liliana and Teferi 3 cannot be like undersold, right? Like Teferi 3 bounce your Kiln Fiend feels terrible. Teferi 3 kill your Kiln Fiend is like, oh my goodness, can't win, right? And so like the nature of their deck taking so much longer to win, and like it feels like somehow it became the theme of this episode of like being proactive and like actually doing stuff kind of matters a lot. And then also the thing about this Prowess deck that I've noticed is it might be the deck besides Amulet Titan that I've seen reward mulliganing the most of like any deck. Like you can go down to 5 pretty consistently. Like I have a pretty hard and fast rule of like I don't have a creature I don't keep on 6 or 7 basically all the time, and I just go to 5 and I've mulled to 5 like in a lot of games, and I just win those games very easily because of the proactive nature of like Prowess creature into like cantrip spell bolt into like dart, flashback dart, other spell just kills people a lot of the time. And you kind of like check all the BS in the format, and the deck's surprisingly resilient. I think it's like not the best deck of the format, but it's like kind of a good deck, and it's interesting how much my view has changed on that deck with just spending some more time and like really grinding out leagues with it. It's just surprisingly good. What do you think about Burn, since that's the other kind of red deck in the format?
It feels weird seeing Burn make a comeback now when a lot of people are playing Uro, but I mean, I always really like Burn, so I'm interested.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Burn.
I think conceptually I still don't like it right now, but I have been seeing a lot of people play it, so maybe I'm just wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. I imagine the Jund matchup is still not great. I imagine it's better than the Prowess. Like, if Prowess and Burn had to choose, like, I think Prowess never chooses, and maybe Burn would choose against another deck. But yeah, I've seen the Burn players like adapting to Uro. Like, I've seen a lot more Skullcracks in the main deck and things of that kind of nature to like mitigate the disaster that is turn 3 Uro into like double spelling after that. But yeah, I think Burn's pretty good. I've been seeing some results with it. I can't speak to it personally. It's not a deck I've played a lot, but I'm unsure why I want to play Burn over Prowess, except for the Jund matchup. That's like the thing that always kind of sticks with me. And maybe if I played Burn more, I could tell you the reasons for that. But for right now, I feel like kind of Prowess is where it's at for red decks. It's just so strong, and the repetitive source of damage that the creatures provide and the card advantage that Bedlam Reveler and Line Up the Stage provide really cannot be undersold. It is like an actual thing a lot of the times. All right, Allie. Deck that just destroys both of those, Dredge. What do you think about Dredge right now? Because when the metagame's fair, Dredge is kind of where it's at historically.
I have not seen a Dredge list in so long. I mean, I'm very interested to see just some new cards in Dredge, like Ox of
Agonis.
Agonis. There we go. Yeah, but I mean, other than that, it's kind of just what we've been seeing from Dredge for a long time. And I don't know. I've played Dredge like a couple times, and after Faithless Looting, it just has not.
Kind of feels like a big zoo deck, right? Ever since Faithless Looting has gone, it's just kind of like I put these creatures in play and hope it's enough.
Yeah, like sometimes it is. It just feels a lot less consistent, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's a good word for it. I think the thing that I always really liked about Faithless Looting in that deck is, I mean, obviously, like turn 1, it was a great play, right? Like you set up your graveyard, etc. But that mid-game burst that it allowed for like a double Dredge, like on turn 3 or 4, which is somehow the mid-game in Modern, it is so impactful a lot of the times. Just like it'd be like, okay, I'm like going kind of well, they dredge, they think, and they're like, all right, flashback Faithless Looting, like dredge 10 basically, and it's just like, oh my goodness, I can never win now. And Ox of Agonis kind of fills that role, but asks a lot more of you and is like way worse on the front half. Like requires you to have a Cathartic Union basically to cast it or to get in the graveyard if you don't mill it over, like if it gets stuck in your hand. So yeah, I think I can't remember who called it Big Zoo, but yeah, it's kind of, I'm not really vibing with it, and it doesn't feel like it's gotten enough, right? Like a lot of the decks in Modern right now have gotten a lot of new powerful cards, and there's just like a real power surge to a lot of these fair decks in Modern, like between Urza, Uro, Kroxa, those kind of things. And I feel like Dredge just doesn't have that. And I feel like talking about this also tells me like what I think about Tron being kind of weaker, is I feel like Tron hasn't got that same kind of juice up. And I feel the same way about Shadow. I feel like Shadow hasn't gotten anything really good. It had like the metagame and Once Upon a Time before, but now all those things have shifted away from when we saw Shadow do so well at regionals. So yeah, I just don't really vibe with Dredge. I think Dredge is really hard too, and I think that's a big part of it. Like, I think people undersell like how hard Dredge can be, especially if it's not good. Like, if a deck's not like particularly great and it's hard to play, that's like kind of a recipe for disaster if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. It's like you're like battling against like every other deck, but you're also like battling your own deck as well, because it's just not where it has been historically. So I think you just need to know the ins and outs of the deck a lot more than just picking it up, running it through a couple leagues, and registering it.
Yeah, I agree. last deck I wanted to talk about, since it's had a bit of an upswing recently, I think it won a PTQ. Humans. What do you think about Humans? This was the deck that, broke out. It was very popular. It's always a deck you still see. No matter what, you always see Humans at a Modern tournament. People love to play it, but it's kind of good again. What do you think about it? Because it seems like it would have a harder time against some of these fair decks. But maybe I'm just totally off base there. I don't know.
Everyone will always play Humans.
It's so true.
I don't really know. I haven't played Humans in such a long time. I think it's definitely in a better place than it was before. I know Dylan Hand has been...
Who?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know that person, actually.
Sorry, so Dylan Hand, maybe we were talking before the show and I wanted to get an answer from Dylan about what he thought about Humans, and he just gave me the go to my Patreon every time.
I mean, I know he was talking the other day. I think it was the list that won was one of the lists off his Patreon. So, obviously, people are still playing it. It's still doing all right. I guess not still. It's kind of making a comeback, I guess. I'm just kind of looking at this list. There's... Ooh, this person played a Magus of the Moon in their...
I love it.
5-color Humans list.
Maybe that's the trick to Modern right now. That's the secret. The last 2 PTQs won by Magus of the Moon. Maybe that card is just low-key busted. I'm going to put it in my Titan deck.
I mean, I think this is another deck that you can kind of tailor your sideboard to just be able to fight whatever's going on in the meta right now. So, I'm seeing, a Mirroring Crusader in the sideboard here, and that's just pretty much, impossible for Jund to deal with outside of, specifically Lightning Bolt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, that's a consideration. They're also playing, Auriok Champion to deal with, Prowess and Burn. That makes sense. Also, Jund.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's also nice in Dredge. It was, it used to be, the only way you could win was, establishing, an Auriok Champion and then, another one or a Phantasmal Image on it and, kind of pray from that point.
Yeah, so, I mean, if you've been playing Humans for a long time, if you're really good at the deck, go ahead, play it. I think you can do well with it. I think the deck's a lot more complicated than people give it credit for.
Yeah.
I never did particularly well playing it. It just didn't click with me. I got my first day 2 ever with the deck, but sometimes deck's just powerful and you just have to turn cards sideways. The hard games are really hard, though.
Yeah, there's something to be said about, when you just play raw, strong cards, right? Like Oko and Urza. They just kind of, get you out of situations. And it's not like the cards in Humans are, that bad. Mana Strider, Champion, Thalia's Lieutenant. Those kind of cards, Thalia, those are strong cards, but they don't have, that same oomph that some of those other things do. And my experience from playing Humans was you're not allowed to make, more than one big oops is normally all you're allowed in a match, you really got to get your money's worth out of each card. Yeah, I have played Humans in the past. I was a dum-dum and played it instead of Hogak, at an SCG, and lost playing for top 8. I lost my chance for the win and end, and I got top 16 or whatever. But the deck is just so hard. But I will say this: regardless of how bad your matchup is with Humans, the proactive nature of it does just bail you out so often. My experience was that no matter how bad a matchup was, is if I got to Champion the Parish and the Thalia's Lieutenant and the Mana Strider, it kind of didn't matter. It was just that's just a billion damage at your face now. Did you combo me? Yes or no? We're did you have the exact card you need? Yes or no? And I do like that aspect of a deck. That what I learned today is that I'm maybe a beatdown mage and I didn't know. And this is kind of a therapy session, and it all kind of came out during this. I just didn't know I thought I was a cool combo player or whatever. It turns out I was just an aggro player at heart the whole time. Wow. Didn't expect that.
I think a lot of combo players get into that. I was oh yeah, Twin, I'm a combo player. I have not played combo in forever.
Dang. Side note, I started playing Magic around the time right before Twin got banned. So all my experience with Twin, except for 1 3-round local thing, was playing against Twin as elves. And that kind of dictates. That's how you know my experience against Twin wasn't good. It's like, Elf, go. And they're like, combo kill you. And I'm like, no, I have all this mana. Yeah. That deck was strong. Man, what a time. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Constructed Criticism. Allie, before we head out, if you had to play a modern tournament, what would you do? What would you be playing?
I mean, I would probably just register Jund right now. I don't think that's a big surprise. I did, while we were looking at these deck lists, download Burn, so I'm excited to see what happens there. I'll run that through a league, but yeah, just kind of like still excited to kind of like explore the format, because there's not a ton of tournaments going on right now, so it's like largely unsolved. I think if we look at like the top 32 of this PTQ, though, we obviously see that this Urza deck is kind of just really good. Uro, not Urza.
Urza.
Yeah.
Why did he have to do that? Why did someone have to make that the name? It's so hard to say.
And yeah, I'm just like scrolling down through all these and all the preview cards. The first preview card that pops up for all the decks are Breeding Pool. I'm so sick of Breeding Pool. I love Simic, but
Breeding Pool's had a big year. Like
2 years at this point.
That's so true, actually. It's wow. It felt like Blue Green was like kind of bad and like not that strong in Magic, like from the time I started playing until like War of the Spark. I mean, I guess you could count Rogue Refiner too, but like around that time, it felt like, dang, this card, like this color combo is they're really pushing it. I don't know, it's kind of wild. So if you had to play a tournament, you'd be Jundin. You're just gonna Crocs to them.
Yeah, love a good Croxa.
Yeah, she kind of rocks. Yeah.
How about you?
I think I would play Prowess because I don't really want to slog through everything with Titan, but I think it's weird. If I was playing an Open, I would definitely play Amulet, and if I was playing a Moto event, I would definitely play Prowess. Because, like, I think the difference in, like, a real-life tournament is there's less fluidity in cards, and so, like, knowing your deck and having a strong plan and being, like, a kind of weird deck in a way in the form of Amulet Titan, I think is real strong. But on Moto, things change and adapt really quickly, and I think Prowess is in kind of a good spot, and outside of those Jund players, I think you have a lot of game versus the rest of the field, surprisingly. So I think I went from last week saying I got to learn how to play Prowess to I'd put my life on the line for Prowess. That's where I'm at. All right, well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Constructed Criticism. Allie, if someone wants to find you, where can they go?
You can find me on Twitch, twitch.tv/mythic_Meebo, or you can find me on Twitter at Mythic Meebo.
And that's MEEBO, right?
Correct.
The second E is what gets you.
No underscore in the Twitter. Unfortunately, someone stole the Twitch no underscore from me.
Wow.
F in the chat.
Yeah, we need to get the verified and like steal that one back. That's what needs to, you can't Twitch verified, right? I think
it's like partner.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we'll get partner anyways. Just 2 for 1 it. You can find me at Mason E. Clark on Twitter. You can find my Twitch at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. That's gonna do it for this week's episode, and we'll see you all next week for another episode of Constructed Criticism.